We'll be here all day. There's 4 or 5 events, and so I'm just here introducing the first one. I just want to add that at the end of the open source stream today at 4:45, we'll be in here with a series of lightning talks. So feel very welcome to join for that. The lightning talks are all 5 to 7 minute talks. I sent something out to the AMIA listserv about that, and I think in yesterday's conference email that went out, there was a link to it. But if you'd like to give a lightning talk later, either by myself, I'll kind of host it later, or use the Google form in the conference email, and then see you later. And it's a sorry, what is it called? Like a session? Yeah. Thanks. All right.
Thanks, Dave.
Yeah.
Hello, everybody. So hello, my name is Michael Campos-Quinn, and I'm the metadata and digital asset manager for the UC Berkeley Art Museum and Pacific Film Archive, which basically means that I'm a cataloger, and I'm also responsible for, for the day-to-day care of digital assets that include still images and digitized AV material in the museum and the film archive. And I'm also involved in digitization project planning, in particular where projects impact metadata, storage, and access. And over the last year or so, I've also become intimately involved in our digital preservation planning for digitized AV material. And this last year of rethinking our approach to digital preservation has taken us down a really exciting path towards using, and probably more excitingly, contributing to and creating open source tools. So this presentation is going to give some context for the decisions that we've made along this path, and some of the rationales and rationalizations that have led us away from a set of proprietary tools and towards modular open source ones, and hopefully also offer an assessment of our state of care, or our capacity for care, as a cultural heritage institution responsible for digital objects. And I'm also hoping to present a subjective experience that what it's been like for me as a novice coder to build my skills in various programming languages, to learn about software development best practices, and also offer some reflections on what's brought me here. So my gender, my particular position in my career, the institutional support that I've received or not received, as the case may be, etc. Okay, so let's briefly start with some common ground for this discussion. The Society of American Archivists, which is in that authority, defines open source software like this. And what I take from this kind of definition of open source is emphasis on tools being available for a community to use, tinker with, improve on, and reshare with others for the benefit of the community as a whole. And this is often in opposition to software development that's driven by a profit motive to create monolithic black box tool to be sold as a product or as a service. Which is not to say that people don't use open source software to make a profit, but that tools are modified and used in the open as a matter of principle. And there are many great open source tools available to the AV archiving community, some of the big names being FFmpeg and MediaInfo, which I'm sure a lot of people in this room use. And open licenses constitute another facet of what makes a project open source. And some big players here are the family of Creative Commons licenses, as well as software-specific licenses like BSD and GNU. So these licenses provide language that spells out this kind of community spirit in a legally binding form. And we're also really lucky that there are a lot of people involved in AMIA who actively contribute to tools like FFmpeg and MediaInfo, and that there's an active community within AMIA who are super smart and dedicated to creating new tools, new applications for existing ones, and also creating documentation, like a film provider, that helps lower the barrier to connecting with and using some of these tools. And there's a whole big list of them here at the AMIA open source GitHub repository. Again, the emphasis in this approach to software is sharing knowledge, working transparently, and contributing to the collective body of understanding. And so I keep using the word community, but we're also kind of just a bunch of pinko utopians. Another excellent feature of the current state of open source software development is that with some skillful Googling and some forums like Stack Overflow, as well as a lot of patience and perseverance, you can teach yourself a lot of coding skills on your own. On the other end of those Google searches are many people who are willing to share their knowledge and experience with you. So you can say that community begets community. And another shout out to the AMIA community is that we're lucky to be affiliated with supportive contingent of individuals who are principled, generous with their time, willing to help out newbies, and have put years worth of effort into projects that are open for anyone to try out and add to on GitHub. And so I've built up open source as kind of a community-driven counterpart to the tech world idea of capitalist entrepreneurs, and also as kind of the right thing to do when selecting a given software tool. But there's a flip side to that argument that I'll get to a bit later that also involves ethics. So our first obligation as archivists is to the collections that we steward. And that also involves making sure that the technical and staff infrastructure are supported in a way that ensures continuity of care for our collections. And adopting open source tools is really awesome, but jumping into a community pool also means getting wet with all the other people who are in there. And it means taking responsibility for your contributions to the community and also internally supporting staff who build institutional knowledge of how a given set of tools will fit into your workflows. So in other words, free and open source software doesn't come without costs. Okay, so back to our use case. BAMPFA has been using a variety of approaches to digitization and digital preservation of AV materials since about the mid-2000s. And since then, we've done in-house digitization of analog tape and film in addition to outsourcing digitization on a project-by-project basis. And also, FYI, we still do photochemical preservation projects. And in 2016, we moved from our brutalist, all-concrete building that opened in 1970 that I love personally, to a new building that was more seismically sound. And this move became an opportunity to rethink some of our infrastructure. So this included setting up a network and various hardware that would support film and video digitization centered around an NEH grant that was used to purchase a laser graphics film scanner. And so here's where things get a little bit weird. I don't totally know all the backstory to all this. So for reasons that were unknown to me, it became the responsibility of the contractor who was hired to install and configure our theater's displays in the internal AV network to select and implement the systems that would support digital preservation, storage, and access to our collections. So our film collection curator and my supervisor in the library laid out the basic structure and technical requirements of such a system, but for various reasons that were, they weren't given very much say in its selection or its installation. And so this basic structure spells out that we would store redundant copies of our master files on LTO tape, and the derivatives should be readily available for research. Descriptive metadata should be drawn from the Film Collection Management Database, which is in FileMaker. And the result of this process was a contract for a proprietary system called Phoenix that was created by a company called Solaritech, specializing in tools to manage footage from police body cameras, dash cameras, security cameras, and also apparently sports production, but I don't know much about that. To be fair, we never quite got Phoenix up and running in a production capacity, partly due to some subcontractor mismanagement. But even if we had gotten Phoenix all the way up, we would have been stuck with an opaque proprietary system with a litany of complaints, even beyond its sort of less than modern interface. Not to mention the questionable business interests of the company behind the product that we're using. So just take a sec to look at that interface, and then the inset on the promo material here, it's the same deal, even though they market it as different products. Okay, so as an arts organization whose collections are more often than not positioned against figures of authority and capitalism generally, it seems like a betrayal of our institutional ethics to pay money to a company that exploits a market for evidence management, for police and prosecutors, not to mention its branded body cameras and squad car cameras. There are also some claims in Solaritech's marketing material about automated metadata generation and smart redaction that really make my librarian hackles go on pretty hard. And I have to wonder how successful public requests for evidence in such a system will prove to be. So Phoenix uses a proprietary database system that seems to have been baked in place in the 90s when Phoenix was first developed. And this made accessing and extending its metadata functions really difficult. And that meant that our assistant film archivist had to copy and paste metadata by hand from the collection database. And one of the other major red flags was that it uses a proprietary TAR, or tape archive format, to write data to LTO tapes. And this means that the data on the tapes written by Phoenix is only accessible from within Phoenix itself. And in contrast, one of the benefits of LTO as a storage medium is that the data on the tape is accessible via LTFS, or linear tape file system, which is an open source file system format developed by IBM and supported more or less by the consortium of LTO hardware manufacturers. And the main user-side benefit of LTFS is that once it's mounted, users and also other software can interact with the files on the tape as though they were regular files on the file system. So long story short, it was not a system based on principles accepted by the archival community, and it was also not a sustainable model for BAMPFA's digital collections over the long term. So it's time to get out. Where would we go though? The main alternative model that we looked to was a microservice approach, which stands in contrast to a monolithic program like Phoenix, the name of the left, full microservices or little tribbles that keep proliferating. And this approach breaks down each component in the preservation workflow into smaller and ideally discrete tasks. Each microservice can then be improved, altered, extended, or deployed as a particular use case might require. And Archivatica is a really high-profile example of an open source digital preservation system using this model, and it's one that enjoys a pretty enthusiastic adoption in the archival community. As we were considering our options, though, Archivatica seemed too complex to set up with our current staffing situation, and any hosted Archivatica services were way, way, way beyond our budget. So as I started to look at other relevant projects that could help us figure out how to proceed, along with some of the theoretical and technical background that would support this kind of work, I came up with this inspo board. Around the time that it became clear that Phoenix was going to need to go, I read a blog post somewhere, I don't remember where, sorry, about media microservices, which is a project at the City University of New York. And media microservices uses the Bash programming language and a set of scripts to perform digital preservation activities. In the process of researching this project, installing it, testing it, playing around with the code, I also came across a lot of other really cool projects on GitHub that became really excellent guides on scripting for AD preservation with a microservice framework in the back of our minds. And we also needed to ensure that the metadata associated with our digital preservation masters was robust enough to meet our needs. And we looked at Premise as a framework to describe preservation actions taken on our digital assets, and also PBCore as a container for both descriptive and technical metadata that could be stored with our masters. And in the OAIS model, the stored files and the metadata form an archival information package, which is a way of thinking about our master and derivative files along with the metadata as a unit, so that we can perform as an active verb, ongoing verb, digital preservation over the long term. This is one way to look at the underlying task of digital preservation, so to nurture an environment in which digital objects can be actively preserved over the long term. And this environment includes hardware, software, and also staff labor. We were able to repurpose a lot of existing hardware and also existing workflows when we decided to abandon Phoenix, some of which are listed here. Excuse me. And we also had to keep Phoenix up and running in parallel to any new system that would be developed, so that we could begin the really long, tedious process of retrieving terabytes of data that had made it into that system, and also untangling the mess of which files had been backed up onto which LTO tapes. And looking through GitHub and asking for help via email and Stack Overflow, and also finding lots of really annoying issues on other people's GitHub projects, I was able to articulate some more functional specs for what a new system would look like. And with these specs in mind, or more realistically, like, as I was building the specs in my mind, I started installing and trying out different tools that I found. Media microservices quickly became a top contender as a replacement for Phoenix, since the various scripts cover a really huge amount of digital preservation ground. And you can just kind of see the interface here. I don't know if we can really read any of that, but this is just like the help screen for it. And it became clear enough, though, that media microservices, as it was in use in CUNY, was not going to fit into our existing workflows. So for one thing, convincing staff to become comfortable with command line tools on the terminal on top of replacing existing software, however dysfunctional it might have been, seemed like a really hard sell. And these scripts are also built on a command line interface that's intended to be used in interactive sessions, actually on the terminal, with some of that interactivity geared towards processes and workflows that are specific to the CUNY setting. And so I had this idea that I could use some kind of a control script and a simple web-based interface to automate the calls to ingest file, which is basically the main script of media microservices that does a lot of the control of the different microservices within the project. And with some emails to Dave Rice, one of the main authors of the scripts, and some tinkering, I rewrote a portion of ingest file to allow the necessary variables, the file paths, to be declared as you actually call the script. This also let me suppress the user interview portion of the script, which meant that I could run ingest file from other scripts instead of needing actual human input in real time. And when I was satisfied that this process would work, sort of at least in my limited test cases, I submitted my changes as a pull request to the Media Microservices project on GitHub. And really briefly, a pull request is a way for you to ask the owner of an open source repository to pull in work that you've done into the source code of the project itself. And this was my very first pull request, and it was a really scary moment because it was also the first time I'd ever put any of my newbie coding skills in front of anybody else. But it was also really surprisingly rewarding. And I was welcomed by some of the contributors to the project with some helpful comments and some suggestions. And this was my first real life step down the path to contributing to open source software. And even though that pull request didn't really go anywhere, it was a real eye-opener for me to how easy it can be to make those first steps. And for me in particular, getting past the anxiety of talking to strangers was much, much harder than any of the scripting problems, which really makes sense since you're asking someone, you're asking someone you don't know to let you make changes to work that they've spent who knows how much time working on. But reaching out some degree of humility and also doing as much of your own research in advance will go a long way towards making pals in open source. Okay. At the same time, another really cool tool that I came across is a digital asset management system called ResourceBase. And this is also an open source project. And it's one that seems really well suited to our access needs. It also has a really well-documented API, or application programming interface, which would allow us to add assets and metadata programmatically. And coincidentally, it turned out that CUNY also uses ResourceBase, and this fact became a really big selling point for my boss, who was really glad to hear a testimonial from a known colleague. And I saw ResourceBase as a front end for the digital preservation nitty-gritty that would happen behind the scenes, with access copies and descriptive metadata posted to the DAMs, along with identifiers that could link an asset to the preservation metadata stored in MySQL, along with information we would need to retrieve an information package from LTO tape. And it only took a few days to get a working proof of concept up and running. It was fairly simple, but Media Microservices is written in Bash, but I was more familiar at the time, and I still am, with Python, which is another relatively approachable programming language. So this control script that I was mentioning earlier was written in Python. And this control script was running Bash scripts in Media Microservices, as well as the MySQL calls that would add database records for the assets and also for preservation metadata. It's really hard to say the word metadata for me. The web interface I made for this process was written in PHP. And it kind of worked, but one of my appeals for help on Stack Overflow produced basically my favorite piece of advice I've ever gotten. I'll let you read that yourself. Even though this commenter was being kind of a jerk, he wasn't necessarily wrong. And eventually, I wound up rewriting a lot of the core functionality of Media Microservices in Python. And I found a Python-based open source web application framework, which is called Flask. And this proved to be a more robust way to handle the interaction between users and the scripts doing the digital preservation heavy lifting. And I also wrote some Python scripts to replicate functionality from LTO pers, which is on the Inspo board earlier, It's another AMIA linked project that lets you interact with LTFS programmatically. And this gave us a consistent way to write data to and retrieve data from LTO. And the Flask app also handles the queries to our collection database. It creates records in our preservation database, and it posts assets and data to resource base. So the result of all this is a repository that we have in place that meets those detailed functional specs that I just spelled out earlier. And I named the system Edith, in honor of Edith Kramer, who was the PFA's director from the 80s up until 2005. She has a really incredible memory, which is sort of why this fit. But she's also a really huge advocate for film on film, and she hates that I named this software. So here's just a screen grab of what the interface looks like. And we're in the process of getting it set up in production. Things are kind of in beta state, but we're moving along. Okay. So now I'd like to take a little look inward and think about the process of getting to this point and assess our state of care that I mentioned at the beginning of my talk. So at a really basic level, there's a cost-benefit question that asks a project like this, is it worth it? But I think there's also some really important questions to ask here that are informed by authors who describe a feminist ethics of care. And I won't go into that really deeply here, but I'll mention that concept as a point of reference. So in short, an ethics of care puts justice and responsibility towards others at the center of ethical considerations. And in this model, no individual is acting alone in like an isolated universe of platonic ideals, but everyone acts in a world in which historical injustices and power imbalances are recognized as part of what brings us to our current state of affairs. Earlier on, I mentioned care towards our collections, which is at the center of our archival work. And I also mentioned the environment in which that care takes place. And that includes the ways that our collections arrive under our care, the infrastructure that surrounds the work being done, the software in use, and also the staff that perform the work. And so an assessment of our project in this light has to consider these elements in relation to broader questions of justice and economic as well as human sustainability. And so in terms of the economic impact of this project, there were some upfront costs that were supported with funds from various grants that would be impacted by this work. So for example, we bought a new server for like $6,000, which hosts the app I was talking about, and also resource base, as well as handling all the transcoding of the video files. Very, very fast, very awesome. And it also is the interface with our LTO decks. There have also been some really considerable staffing costs in terms of my time spent over the last few months setting up the various scripts, testing, and coordinating with other staff in the institution. And we have a really small office, so my time diverted from my other responsibilities has really an outsized impact on our work. And there are also some unknown future costs that we can at least try to plan for. So like, I've been more closely involved in this project than anyone else on staff. So what happens if I get hit by a bus tomorrow? You know, who's going to maintain the system and fix things if something breaks? Do we have sufficient interest and buy-in from other staff at BAMPFA who are doing digitization or creating born digital materials so that there's a critical mass of people who are actually interested in seeing the system succeed? And some of the safeguards that are in place include having had conversations with staff over the last year about this project and about building internal goodwill towards this idea. And also making sure that the new system is built with the actual needs of our staff from the outset. So another really incredibly important element has been to document as much of the new system as possible. So that means documenting the code, but also writing out really high-level explanations of how the system works. And documentation of the coding project is a way really of creating relationships with people in the future. And that might, in a lot of cases, end up being you. You know, like a week later when you write the code, you forget what the hell it is. Okay, so one last question / this should have been done differently. So if I'm going to reference a feminist ethic of care, I also have to ask like, what role my gender, race, and class played into my ability to sort of butt into my institution's discussion of how to address problems we faced with Phoenix. So technically, it's outside of my job description to manage this kind of project. And I'm pretty sure that some other staff member who identifies with more marginalized communities would have had a much more difficult time, A, feeling entitled to propose the kind of changes that I put forward, or B, getting listened to in the face of a really ambitious project that seemed far from possible at the outset, and also has faced its fair share of technical setbacks along the way. So I have to take some responsibility for taking advantage of that position, even though we've gotten what I see as a good deal of benefit from it. So has it been worth it? I would say yes, but obviously there's some things that I learned along the way that I would have done differently and that I wish the institution we could have done differently. We've extracted ourselves from an expensive proprietary system that not only failed to serve our needs, but also profited from a relationship to a militarized surveillance state. We've been able to fund at least a little bit of work to add functionality to media info, which hopefully will start a precedent for our use of tools made by people who we respect. And we're doing better by our collections, and hopefully we have tools that will be able to sustain and improve over the long term, and yes, eventually we'll ditch it in favor of something better. So, thank you.
Thank you, Michael. Hi, everyone. Thanks for coming out on Saturday morning to join us. My name is Sue Barrett, and I'm the Director of Digital Repository Services at Arizona State University Library. I'm presenting strategies to convince your sponsor or your supervisor to commit time, people, or money to your new and exciting software project. Securing buy-in for open source offers an opportunity to test drive software and learn new skills, but open source is not free. Resources have to be applied, and securing buy-in is the first step towards getting those resources. Open source tools are frequently built for specific purposes under the scope of someone else's project. If you have questions, most developers are happy to tell you about their work and what it's good for, and apparently give great advice. But just like finding a new car, a little homework goes a long way. If you went to the car dealer and asked for a green car that fits 2 people and has a sunroof, you could get a Maserati or a Sherman tank. They are both green and seat 2 people and have an open roof. And lots of people spend a lot of time trying to use Maserati software or to implement Sherman tank solutions that may not suit your needs and cost a lot of money and time. So while investigating your options, keep in mind the triple constraints: scope, schedule, and budget. These are the primary components of all project management methodologies, and you need to know if you can accomplish your project goals within your proposed schedule and scope and budget. The quality of the project is influenced by these 3 constraints, and your proposal should show that you can reasonably achieve your goals within the 3 constraints. So the first constraint is scope. Excuse me. One of the most important homework activities is defining the needs, and I like to use a requirements list. I hope that's familiar. The requirements list can be less than 10 items if you have a very light, small project. It could also be a few hundred, depending on the complexity of the software that you need. The requirements list is then used to evaluate your software options. And I tend, whether I'm alone or I'm with a team, to write the requirements out and as people review the documentation about a piece of software, they rate their confidence. How well do they think that this tool is going to do for me what I think it's going to do? And give it a 1 to 4, because then when you get to the end of your requirements list, you can quantify that and sum it all up and say, well, we have an 80% confidence rating in this piece of software, or no, it's more like 2%. We don't need that. So prioritize your requirements. A common method is the Moscow method: must, should, could, and won't. and use the priorities to closely scope the requirements list to the core needs. Now you can assess the open source options and make a more informed decision. If you have a large project, multiple people may need to participate. Do you need a Maserati or a Sherman tank? Something else. It's basically a process of elimination. Define what you need and eliminate all the software options until you have one that meets at least most of your needs. Document your requirements and how you reach your decisions. Someone somewhere down the road, if you have a new supervisor one day, may challenge why you chose this piece of software, and you can go right back to that documentation and say, well, here you are, here's the requirements list. We make better decisions together. So even if you are truly a lone arranger and now lone developer, find a buddy at another institution or on the listserv, or call people at other institutions who are using the software for their opinions. It's always better not to work in isolation. Schedule. Do you need help to install or configure the software? When is a good time for an IT team member to help you? Get on their calendar and find out when they can assist you, because they will not be available next week or probably next month. Maybe next summer is a good time for any IT team member in your institution. Are you familiar with command line? Find out if the software has an administrative user interface or if it uses command line. And don't panic, you can learn it, but be sure to schedule time for learning the tool into your proposal. What other projects are currently scheduled? Do you know if the project should become a top priority and why? I encourage you to get by and make this part of your regular work, not something that you do on the evenings or the weekends, because even though you can prove to your boss that you can do it, it is a rabbit hole you will never get out of. Budget. Return on investment is frequently used to justify new projects and new staffers. When will the unit reap the benefits of this new software? Archivists are not money makers, and neither are archives. So it is possible, however, to quantify the benefits. Some IT shops do not include staff time in their budgets. It's just part of their salary. But if your shop budgets hourly or weekly time per project, you'll need to know the hourly salary of yourself and any of your IT support staff or your archivists to use in your estimates. Hourly wage times the hours into the project equals your cost. If you're, ask your IT folks how they estimate costs and if they include staff time. Time is still valuable. The server administrator, a developer, your time, other archivists and curators and staffers in your institution. Will this software reduce manual labor or automate a process? That's savings in both time and staff salaries. So while it's difficult to sometimes prove what we do has value, there are ways for you to quantify what we're doing. How does this project advance the unit towards achieving its annual goals? If there is value in establishing that within your project, and will this software help you increase the number of completed projects in a year? Is the project addressing a pressing need or a future disaster? What would that cost us? What is the timeline estimate for install and configuration and testing? When I'm talking about projects with new folks, based on my previous experience with that person, I'm also looking at whether the person proposing the project has the necessary skills or if they're going to need support. And are they a focus on one project at a time kind of person, or are they someone who can really juggle multiple projects at one time with competing deadlines? To be successful, the project really does need to be structured and scheduled to support that person's working style. So if you know your own working style, it also helps to put it in the project. You might be a one-person show or part of a team, and your unit leader or sponsor has to balance what capacity the team has for a new project. Licensing or financial contribution to the developer or the community might also be requested. Developers are not required to share their work with the world. Give them credit on any public-facing systems that you present, and give them any small contributions that they request to show them that you do appreciate their their work. So most importantly, try to summarize when the institution will see that return on the investment. So now we're going to talk a little bit about the people who will approve your project. Your sponsor is anyone who approves the project: supervisor, administrator, IT staff person. A stakeholder is your sponsor and the people who will help you test and use the new software, if there's any. Getting support of archivists or curators may very well help your proposal. They can help with the requirements gathering and the software assessment, and they'll even can sign their name at the bottom of the proposal saying that they participated and they approve of it. Assess your stakeholders' motivations and write for their administrative style. The sponsor temperaments. The cheerleader, the pirate, the analyst, and the cowboy. Who is your sponsor? So the cheerleader accepts higher risk but prioritizes their own time. They don't really want to be part of the project, but they also will delay projects by refusing to make decisions. The pirate, they accept high risk for high returns. They don't necessarily want to be cut out of a project, but they will delay projects when it doesn't meet their #1 needs. Or if another priority comes in that supersedes yours, you could very well get downgraded and rescheduled to another time. The analyst is unwilling to accept high risk, regardless of what the proposed benefits might be. They delay projects by failing to make decisions when they're presented with too many options. And the cowboy, they accept high risk in order to have totally complete control with no communication with the staff team whatsoever. They are my difficult, challenging people. They're the ones I struggle with the most. So who's your sponsor? Figure out who you're working with. If you want to engage with team, if they don't want to engage with the team, you probably have a cheerleader or a cowboy. If they are interested in engaging with the team, you probably have an analyst or a pirate. So once you figure out who your sponsor is, tailor your justification to that person and their working style. The cheerleader, find an influential person who's trusted by them, and perhaps that person will be allowed to make project decisions. If you have an analyst, present a phased approach, keep that person up to date in every single phase so they feel totally informed and they know exactly what you're doing and when, and that you're following your schedule and you're hitting your milestones, and guide them through each of those options. For the pirate, relate project decisions and activities directly to what the outcome is going to be, and when you update them, remember to reiterate that we are getting to this project and this is what we're going to reap from this project and what those benefits are. And the cowboy, good luck. Get buy-in from their key partner. The cowboy may accept suggestions from a trusted advisor, and the cowboy may also be influenced by a group of people who have buy-in for your project. So those other archivists and curators may be willing to kind of give that impetus to the cowboy to participate. So writing your proposal, share the big picture, and tell your sponsor what your plan of attack is. Address the 3 constraints: scope, schedule, and budget. Present the findings from your requirements list and the assessment. Why did you or your team select this software? Present the be brief or detailed based on your sponsor's motivations, and then write to those motivations. Be realistic about what you can produce. Everything sounds great on paper, but break big projects into smaller tasks if you have to, especially if you don't have a lot of support. And be clear about the timeline and what you need to be successful. If other projects need to pause to accommodate this project, then explain why this project should be a higher priority. Why is this tool preferable? Is there perhaps an open source vendor who's willing to collaborate with you for pay if we don't have the staff on hand? That's kind of a nice hybrid solution. You're still going to use an open source software, but you benefit and leverage the experience of a vendor who can provide you with expertise to help you avoid potholes. So you're not struggling in the dark, especially if you are alone. Who is your project manager? The person who documents decisions and makes sure that the code gets back into GitHub and communicates updates. Who are the stakeholders? Be clear about who the users will be and what benefit it will be for those users within your museum or library or archives, and if they're a benefit for external users. Why does our current ecosystem not meet the need? Why do we need this software? And then who did you consult, inside and outside the institution, about using this piece of software? What other institutions are using this product? Did you get their opinions and their feedback? If yes, put it in the proposal. How many staff members work on this software at the other institution? If we have 2 people and they have 30, that's a red light. And will they collaborate with us? Is this strictly a one-person development project? And if yes, who's the backup knowledge person? When they take Michael away and make him president, I don't like the bus idea, president, then what are we gonna do without him? What do you hope to learn? How long will it take? Can you guesstimate? Hours per week per person with a draft timeline is usually helpful. Who do you need to collaborate with, perhaps outside the institution? And if we move to production, who will maintain this tool? And will that affect any changes to job descriptions or performance evaluations? Put the most important things the sponsor needs to know at the top of the proposal, you know, the inverted pyramid style of writing. Most of them, especially if they're in leadership, are not going to read every word. So put it at the top, get their attention because they're going to skim the thing. Include a budget if you can get one, if you have one. And manage expectations by telling the sponsor what success will look like. So among the resources I wanted to share, I really want to highlight the Digital Power Institute. For anyone who's new to open source preservation tools, they will literally walk you through from the very first getting oriented stage to functionally installing open source software and using it to fit your microservices within your workflow. And they're a phenomenal group of people. They will answer any question you have and give you a hand. So that's it. Thank you.
Does anybody have any questions? I think we've got a few minutes to hang out. I can do it.
You alluded to your efforts to pass along specialized knowledge, command line and scripting to your team, simplified it, I can't quote the particulars, but giving you a web interface. How did that turn out? Did your team buy into it? Are they up and running on their own? If you were sick or out for a while, could they carry on? I mean, I'm going to toying with trying to get a staff of editors to do some command line work, and I don't have a lot of confidence to embrace it, so I'm just curious.
I mean, yeah, that was one of the hard things, was that there are people who are overworked, and trying to get someone to learn the command line wound up being something, not that I wanted to avoid it, but it seemed like a more sustainable thing to have it just be like, here's a button you can press to do the thing you need to do. And that was the main justification for that. That said, you know, if someone has the time to be able to sit down and like look at how simple it really is, like it's not brain surgery, but it needs a little bit of investment of their time and your time in order to sort of make that connection to how that sort of imposing and like a little bit intimidating step can fit into the work that they need to have happen. I don't know if that helps.
It does. And you also, so you're saying you also made like push a button, take a pill way of taking the scripting and just execute it for people who do not embrace scripting. Right?
Yeah, but with the input of people who there's settings and specifications that totally require their input. So it's not like totally behind the screen. They were involved in the sausage. So any other questions for anyone? You can just chill out.
So you mentioned, back up. So if I am an archivist and I would like to get started writing my own scripts and getting involved in development, but I've never written a line of code before, say Python, for example. Is there any? I know there's a bazillion resources out on the internet about tutorials and online classes you can take. Is there anything in particular that any path you would recommend for getting started with something like that?
Yeah, there's a million different coding schools. They're all terrible. Find a friend, that was most helpful for me. I did do one of those, I did a few modules from one of those things. I personally didn't find it helpful, but maybe you might. There's a million of them out there, so you can try different flavors. For me personally, I Google everything. There's an answer out there, and I think that just with enough muscle memory, after having been exposed to it, you can find answers to the things that aren't already answered. Depending on the complexity of whatever you're trying to do. But Stack Overflow is an insane resource that I can't imagine 20 years ago when it didn't exist, how people did anything.
I just want to say also there's there's also a lot of meetups for local coders. So if you're interested in Drupal or you're interested in Python, you can find local meetups for just Python folks. They're not library people. And they are fantastic. They are so happy to have new people come in, and they will teach you how to write clean code so that you are writing something that can stand up to the test of time. And people aren't going to look at it and go, no, I don't want that. It's a mess. So they're a fantastic open source group of people to connect with.
Sort of a request, maybe it's a tall order, when you think about having team members who are not code people, it would really be great, and this is probably far in the future, to come up with sort of minimum skills, an agreed upon minimal skill set for not being a coder, but working with scripts, being comfortable with it, and sort of almost like a job description. You are competent doing, not from scratch, but working with it, certain level of mastery, because this is all great, but it's all, roll your own crazy quilt of skills, and when you're hiring and staffing, it's hard to communicate this. I guess that's a comment.
I think that is the continual request of every IT person I know. The archivist should know how to do this. The curator should know how to do this. And my answer to you is the curators and archivists have their own job, and they bring a different set of skills to what you're doing, and invite them in. Don't necessarily require them to learn code because their eyes are going to glaze over and you're going to lose them. But invite them in and show them what the tool does and what the output is. And you might very well get some, and you probably will get some very pointed requests about features and functionality. The hard part for the curators and the archivists is that they don't do this every day. So all they can draw from is their own resource, what they have already seen. Usually it's a vendor presentation, and they want that really big shiny thing. And that would be great, but I don't have shiny money. So, tell me what the thing was really liked about it. Let's distill down all the things that piece of shiny does and find that little golden thing that you really have to have. And then we let the IT folks do their job, right? So I would say, even though it would be great for everyone to have a foundational skill set, right? But the folks who have zero technical skills have brought me some of the greatest ideas about understanding metadata, display of metadata, multiple languages, and how they want to be able to interact with their communities of users. And it's totally different, every institution is different, so I would encourage you to invite them even if they don't know anything.
I'm gonna jump in and like answer it a little bit differently, but those are all like super big points. I think there's a cultural barrier too, where there's like, oh, code is so like mystical and cool, and like I'm not gonna tell you how it works. It's seen as something that's really mystical, but it's not. At a certain, like, depending on how far you want to go into it, there's a certain level where you can I mean, encourage people and like welcome them in to say like, okay, you want to move a bunch of files around. Here's some simple scripts that do things that will help you, and this is how they work. And here's like some limitations to it. I don't know. Like I think that there's a cultural answer to that that says, you know, work on demystifying the command line, I guess, or you know, what any of this stuff does. Okay. Well, thanks, guys.